this meeting. Our goal in this meeting is to venture beyond the problem-solving mindset that we're so accustomed to and explore values that deepen our work and build connection. And if we find traction in the next hour, perhaps this conversation can be carried forward within the Catalyst community. So before I hand the mic to Lisa, I'll ask that everyone keep their cameras on and mute yourself when you're not speaking. I should also explain why GHR is here and why we're grateful you are too. In December of 2019, GHR re-articulated our purpose and values around an aspirational practice of humanity. And as a Minneapolis-based foundation that engages in the world, we were inspired by a call from Pope Francis to build bridges and create a culture of encounter. Our first value, lead with love, was immediately tested in 2020 as COVID impacted our partners and communities that we collaborate with, and we responded. Then, following the horrific murder of George Floyd, just 3 miles from our office, we led with love when embarking on the critical yet difficult journey to become anti-racist individuals and an organization. For me personally, as a white man in a white-led foundation, it was painful to realize that it took a killing of another black man by white police in my hometown for me to face the realities of racism. And it was my racial equity coach, Tony Hudson, a black man, whose perspective led me to find my why in that moment. To truly love, I must be anti-racist. My own humanity and that of my wife and daughter depends on it. So as I take responsibility for my not knowing about the depth of racism, I listen to black colleagues and friends and try to decenter myself. I've come to learn that racism is persistent and pervasive, and my technical strategies alone will not solve it. Progress requires values. It requires vulnerability, shifting of my personal beliefs and others, and being in relationship with people of color and my fellow white folk. Lead with love and the practice of humanity continue to challenge me personally. I often question how I'm perpetuating problems that I'm engaged in. GHR too recognizes that it doesn't always live up to its values, but it aspires to in our work in the world. So this is all to say, I'm glad you're here to explore alongside each of us a different way of being in the world. So Lisa, I said a lot just now, but I'd like to invite you to share some of your opening thoughts and lead us into our discussion.
Great, thank you, Chris. I appreciate that and appreciate your generosity of sharing. Given that we only have a few folks with us, I thought maybe we would just take a quick moment and ask everybody to introduce themselves and maybe to share a word about why you're here. Chris just shared about how his organization is leading with love and humanity, and I'm wondering what brought you to this conversation. So I'm Lisa Jackson, as Chris said. I'm the head of social ventures at Tides. We work with fiscally sponsored projects here in the US and outside of the US as well. And I'm here because I'm very interested in, and have always been very determined to figure out how to get folks to do truth telling. How do we talk about our truth? How do we own our truth? And how does owning our truth influence our actions to make the world a better place, or the place that we'd like it to be? So when I come into conversations like this, I am keen to hear other people's truth, as well as to sort of interrogate and make public my truth in this space. So that's a little bit about me. I'd like to invite someone else to jump in and introduce themselves and share a little bit about why they're here. I'll call on, I can call on someone, or someone can just unmute.
I can jump in if that's
Thanks, Jaru, go ahead.
I really was interested in this session. Maybe we can all be on the same screen because we're a small group, but I always say small and powerful go together. Sorry, Urban, maybe we all come on. Anyone who's on camera, sorry. my reason for this session is, I think, like Chris said, there's really strong conflict going on in the world. And everywhere you see things are sort of crumbling in some ways, and yet through it all, humanity is coming up and showing up in every crisis, be it COVID, be it what. Put Lisa back on. Yeah. Oh, man, sorry.
If fine, I'll just remove the spotlight so everyone can.
Yes, I
talking
think
can
that
jump.
would be the best.
Yeah.
Yes. Sorry.
Here, I think it's done.
Okay, so the best thing that we can have, for me, I think the most important is how can we, through all this crisis, come together? Like you said, you're leading with love. How can we sort of build on positivity, on mutual respect, regardless of faith, regardless of gender, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of any of that, you know? And how can we join to make that happen? I think, and that's when I also reached out, because I know that I'd spoken to Kerry and Chris earlier, and I know they felt the same. And I thought it would be really nice to see if we could co-create something which could set this whole thing off in motion. So that's the reason I'm here, despite a crazy catalyzing change week. This is my session from my heart. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeru, and thanks for joining. It looks like we have some new folks coming on. We're just doing introductions and sharing a little bit about why we're here. I'm going to hand it to, is it Deo at the Macarthur Foundation to introduce potentially? Yeah.
So good afternoon from here. I'm calling from Abuja, and I'm really excited to be here. So I work with the Macarthur Foundation as Deputy Director for the Africa Office based in Abuja. And I think I'm here just by happenstance. So last week, Chris and I met at another one of those several virtual meetings. This time around, we were looking at, I think it was power and equity, sometime last week. And I think the conversation centered around solidarity-centered grant making, and the conversation around solidarity, what it means, how to unpack it, and evidence of solidarity that we can actually find around us, that foundations might have been engaged in, sort of led us to the event today. So I was generously invited by Chris, to be a part of this conversation. And I think that I can already feel the connect between, the focus of this conversation this afternoon and what we had last week. So I'm really, I think I will say that I'm a tabula rasa at this point. I just want to take in more. So I'll be in the listening mode, but at the same time, I'm really excited to be here. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
And thanks again, Chris.
Thanks for inviting him, Chris.
Wonderful to see you.
Cordell, can I ask you to come off and introduce, or stay off screen, whatever's comfortable?
Hi, morning, Lisa and all. It's good to see you smile, Lisa, so you won't be too upset with me for not turning on the camera. I'm having a bandwidth challenge here, and I am on this call from beautiful, sunny Jamaica, and happenstance as well. I actually got invited to participate in one of the panels. I knew nothing about this conference, and I declined the invitation, but then looked at the agenda. And this is one of the sessions that I definitely decided to attend. And I now feel vindicated, because here we are talking about humanity, this rebuttable presumption that we continue to share this common notion of a bond. That's being disrupted by a lot of artificiality, a kind of synthetic experience which is being normalized. And probably that is why there's so few of us here, because there are people who take it for granted. This is something we don't have to discuss. It is intuitive that we have this common bond, and everything is indicating the opposite. So it's an absolute pleasure to join you. I come with no expertise whatsoever. I am a lawyer and a media regulator, but I can feel an absolutely positive energy from this group, and it's a great pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for that, Cordell. And of course, I forgive you for not having bandwidth. It's great you came today. Just for folks who are hopping on, it's great to see folks joining. We're going around and sharing a little bit about why we're here today. This, as you can tell, is a mighty group, a small group, and a mighty group who came to talk about humanity and love, which, as Cordell pointed out, we don't often get to talk about, at least not with each other. And so we're excited to hear your reflections about that. And Joni, I'm going to give it to you. I saw you pop off mic, so bravely go ahead.
Hi, I'm Joni Carley, coming to you from Pennsylvania in the USA. And I'm here because I'm working very closely with the SDGs. I'm an ECOSOC rep at the United Nations. And I also used to run a philanthropic foundation. So I did not realize that Catalyst 2030 was so involved with philanthropies. And I ended up at the UN because I felt very frustrated that I was caught in a have-not cycle in philanthropy, feeling like I had drawers full of successful outcomes, and then the census data would come out and nothing changed, really. And so, I was working in a very poor rural area. And so I realized that phenomenal projects, great people, successes weren't enough, that the work had to be much deeper and much more systemic, and that most of philanthropy was not going to go there. I kept a file called Enlightened Philanthropists, and it was very skinny and it never really grew very much. Which was extremely frustrating. So I went on to get expertise in values-driven leadership and cultural development, because I think that's really where it's at. And I was so glad to hear you mention values here, and it was mentioned in other sessions. So I feel like I'm in the right place, which is very exciting. So really, values can be measured, and they can be quantified, they can be tracked over time, and we have systems that do that. They've been used with whole countries, with many, many thousands of people and organizations all over the world of every sort. And so I would like to see values accountability, which is really the only way to account for these things. We think, someone said earlier, I deal with this in my book called The Alchemy of Power. We think that love and things like that are fluffy stuff, inconsequential fluffy stuff. And I call that the fluffy myth, because there's no data that backs that up. There's absolutely no data that backs that up. And in fact, there's plenty of data to the contrary. It's just that data is not being brought into the right conversations. And so, and I'm going to look it up. If you can come back to me, there's a Desjardins quote about fire, rediscovering fire. And I'd love to come back to that. I'm going to look it up in a second. So what I'm about now is I've been working with the evolutionary leaders on a unitive new narrative, because the underlying stories are really stories of separation. And they are not love-based stories, they're fear-based stories. And so they're founded on things like Darwin's survival of the fittest, but now evolutionary biologists understand that fitness, that's only true if you include cooperation as an aspect of fitness. And so, we know that cooperating, loving is really where the power is. And so I'm starting the Unity cluster under the NGO major group. Hopefully they'll accept it, but we have a lot of NGOs coming on board. If there's anyone here who would be interested, to create the Unity cluster at the United Nations. So we are looking for accredited organizations. Thank you.
Very cool. Thank you, Joni. That was fabulous. I wrote down so much of what you said, and I love the fluffy myth in particular. I think, this assumption about things being squishy, values being squishy, not measurable, not quantifiable, or not known, and therefore not being held accountable to, I think is a really powerful statement. And Cordell, your point about the assumption that we all know what we're talking about and agree on things also, I think, resonates with what Joni spoke to in terms of the need to get more explicit about what this thing is called love. What's this thing called humanity, frankly, and how does it intersect with our work? Folks are coming on, and just so folks who are coming on know what's going on, we started with a small but mighty group of folks, and we started the conversation around why you're here, what you bring to this conversation, and what you're hoping to get out of it. Chris Berger from GHR kicked us off sharing his experience as a white man in a predominantly white organization trying to come to grips with the truth and reality of racism as he tried to live his values of love and humanity, and those are the foundation. And so we were just going around and sharing a bit. Given that we've got more folks on, maybe I'll just ask if anyone else would like to jump in and share why they're here, but we won't necessarily have everybody go so that we can maybe keep the conversation going. So welcome. Does anybody want to share why they're here or what they're looking for? Ashraf?
Okay, I'm here because Jeru sent a quick message, and I just like connected. I hadn't read the outline before. I connected to the title and the way you have framed the opening as well for both of us. And so I'm just excited because it is also something I believe in. And as soon as I entered, I heard the word love, a word which is used very often in either politics or in our civil society or in schools. So anyway, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining. Love seems to be resonating with folks, at least some of us this morning. Anyone else want to share what's on their mind or why they're here, or what you're hoping this conversation will do for you today? No? All right. Well, I think what we'd like to do now, because this is a conversation, this isn't a panel, so I'm not going to sit here and wax poetic, and I don't have any brilliance to offer necessarily. As somebody said earlier, there is no degree in love that I know of, or degree in humanity. I have a lot of life experience, but I'm not sure that I have all the answers on this conversation for sure. But what we wanted to do was ask folks to share some examples. And Joni, you started to go down this path with the Unity cluster, for example, where you're seeing the intersection of what you think of as love and humanity with the work you're doing, or with the values you care about most. If you don't use the language of love and humanity, maybe you use something else. But how do you actually see or experience or in your work make happen those values you espouse, right? One of the things that in my work over the years that I've come to really push people on is, if you believe X, then tell me why you do Y, right? And so, because there ought to be a connection, right? You ought to be able to see those values lived in your work. And I'm wondering, for some of you who are deep in this work, where that shows up for you, or if you have examples, if not for yourself, for others. And Chris, if we get crickets, I might ask you to expand on GHR's experience. Got more people joining. Do you want to jump in, Chris? Oh, Dale, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I could share something really, really tiny because it's something that we just started. So for anyone familiar with the Macarthur Foundation, so on our website, you'll find us say we're a foundation that is committed to a just and a Vedant, and a Vedant world. And for many years, we had a set of values that sort of framed our work and sort of led the conception of our strategies and interventions across. But I think that in the last 3 years or so, a number of events sort of happened that then sort of pushed us back to begin to revisit the word just and what it means, really. What does just mean? And so we began to interrogate the word just as a value, and how just are our policies. We basically just began to interrogate the word itself, just, and began to look for evidence of justness, as it were, in practically everything we were doing. So whether it was in terms of grant making, it was in terms of recruitment, it was in terms of procurement, who are our consultants, it was in terms of pay, it was in terms of promotion. And I think it has evolved, in the last 3 years to become something that they're now also thinking about first institutionalizing it. So beyond, like Lisa, you said earlier, that sometimes, we talk about there's a sense of assumption that when I say just, everybody understands what it means. But I think there is a deliberate and clear intentionality in the foundation now to actually define just and codify it in our different work and policy documents. And then we are beginning to also extend that in series of conversations with our grantees to also get them to begin to think about what does just mean for you, whether you are in the US or outside of the US. What is just? How do you see it manifest in your work, in your recruitment, in your intervention, in your targeting, your identifying the beneficiaries? So that's one venture, one enterprise that I think truly connects to this value of love and solidarity that we're talking about. And I won't be surprised that across the different foundations here, you'll find different interpretations of love, or of solidarity, of just, of as some of the things that we're thinking about in a way to change how we have always worked, and that can shift power more to those that we actually set out to help in the first place. I think I'll just stop there.
Wow, thank you. That was fabulous. And I hope others will add some comments in the chat about the codification. I just want to pick up on what Deo said, sort of codifying, right? Making plain the definition that then drives the work, and then naming the work that is connected to that value, I think is huge, because I think we all walk around not being that explicit in our work and take for granted that it's happening, even if it's not necessarily happening, or if it's happening, it's only happening from your vantage point of what it means to be just, or what it means to love. Does anybody else want to jump in on this conversation and share any sort of, whether you're trying to wrestle with this kind of interrogation of your values, or whether you see places where that is showing up in this space? I'd love to hear from others. Feel free to jump in.
We actually founded Catalyst as a values-based network, Lisa. And that's what we looked at. And we thought that we attribute the scale of Catalyst and the growth that we have had mainly because we think that we are bonded together by values. And I think that's what is really, really important for us. And they govern everything. And I think that's one of the most important things that we have. And I think what would be interesting, at least for me as we see this, is how can we build a values-based network, and how can we take that through, and how can that probably translate into all networks. And Joni, I would love to see how Catalyst could probably collaborate with the UN and maybe all of us, and maybe we look at a collaboration coming out of this from all of us in this group, So I think that's just something quite interesting. Ashraf does a lot of work on youth. That's why I said, Ashraf, where are you? Youth and values is the core. You need to be here now. This is really, so.
Yeah, actually, Jeru, you're right. The whole title and the way you all had framed this conversation, and with both of you in the same, holding it, I really got drawn to it. I just jumped in.
Even as you're in the car, so thank you. I also want to invite Deo, who just shared really articulately and clearly I just in ways that I hope other people can hear and benefit from, right? Like I would love for what you're doing to be written and shared in other sessions, because I just think that practice that you're trying to institute at Macarthur, and for it to be Macarthur, quite honestly, I mean, you know, this isn't exactly Macarthur's day-to-day work. So the fact that you're stepping back and doing this, I think is worthy of sharing and having other people engage. Other examples or thoughts folks have about this? Oh yes, Ashraf, go ahead.
Yeah, so Lisa, I'll just take a little leaf from what Jeru was sharing, and there's a little process in Catalyst which we are trying to do. It's called Living the Catalyst Values. And the whole idea is to catch storytelling across the community. I mean, it started small, but at some point pick up stories of how people are seeing the values being lived. So the conversation is, values are not just a statement, but hear it through stories and reinforce them, and also look at where they're being breached and work on them. So I think that's such an important part of organization development. So that's what we are doing in Catalyst 2030. And I want to add something, what called me out here was also the work that I'm doing. I don't want to take too much bandwidth, but you know, this with young people, the whole conversation on youth leadership has been enabling young people to find their purpose, as everybody is in, all of us, young, old, everybody's in search of that purpose. And the whole conversation is on who am I, you know, the main questions, who am I, where am I going, and how do I get there, like that. But the whole exploration that we are having is who are we? So that question has not been placed in the normal course of youth leadership work. So to start with the who are we is so critical.
I love
and one more thing, in our research on youth leadership, like we work with young leaders across the country and young social entrepreneurs, and we asked a bunch of about 50 to 60 young leaders why they come to this collective space, what makes it happen for them, and why do young people come to their collective space. And we came up with 5, we drew from that conversation 5, from that storytelling, 5 feelings that really matter to make youth leadership happen in a holistic way, which was love, learning, freedom, ownership, and social hope. And
wow.
it sort of lands so beautifully to what you all are discussing. And the social hope comes out of my ability to influence my context to some extent, to, you know, to be able to make that difference. So it focuses on what is needed for young people to grow, but also their engagement in society is as much important. Yeah. Sorry.
What I love about what you share, there's so much I love about what you shared, Ashraf, but in particular, bringing us back to the collective we, like who are we, not just who am I, right? And what are my values, but who are we and what are our values, and therefore what do we do together? I think it was the impetus, Chris, I don't know, for this conversation, right? The title is the global we. And I had to ask Chris, I was like, what is we? And he was, because I thought it was like an acronym, and he's like, no, the we that is us. Chris, do you want to talk about that in terms of the session and where you're going with it?
Well, no, you hit it, and as did Ashraf. There's something bigger than each of us, bigger than each of our organizations. As we heard from Jeru, I think that was the impetus for Catalyst, to really create a network of like-minded and values-aligned organizations to move the SDGs forward. I loved hearing how DIO, your organization, has really embraced just and interrogated it. It looks in the chat. I see Supriya mentioned that she likes the word dignity. I'm curious if there are other words that people are interrogating, are trying to bring into their organization and their work. Does anyone have?
Joni has her hand up. I don't know, Joni, if you want to speak on this or something else, but I wanted to acknowledge your hand is raised. Did we lose Joni?
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay.
Chris, did you want to finish that before? Because
No, please do. Please.
okay.
Pick up.
So the me to we and story and narrative, I want to address that, because I think the paradigm shift we're in is a me to we paradigm shift. And the underlying narratives, I want to distinguish between story and narrative, because I think stories are wonderful and they're important, but the deep underlying narrative that our stories are based on, that's what a paradigm shift is a change in that. And we've been in a very separation, fear-based narrative, and we've been working with scientists. I just put the link up on a unitive narrative that's based on cosmology and evolutionary biology, and still has all the principles of love and philosophy in it. So this deep underlying narrative is so critical that we take a deeper look at that. And I wanted to speak about values because they're very distinct, and there's a lot of assumptions that we share the same values. And that may be true to a certain degree, but values are based on needs, first and foremost. So they're kind of in a hierarchy, like along Maslow's hierarchy. And they also are very influenced by a whole lot of different things, and they're primal drivers in people's lives. So they need to be not assumed as much as they are. Just because the youth in one room, we just heard a nice, wonderful list of values that youth had, that was that group of youth. Mm-hmm. And the danger is we say, this is what youth are thinking.
Yeah,
you know,
right.
And there's injustice right there. And because we think values aren't quantifiable, they're this fuzzy stuff, we just keep perpetuating that problem, even those of us who are talking about values, because there's just so much assumption and nobody stops to actually be accountable for them, accountable for what they actually are, which is different from different groups, and which transcends all kinds of other demographics. So if you want to move beyond the gender and we need to deal with those conversations, but if we want to rise, we need to find something that pulls the thread through, and that's values. But you have to know specifically what they are. Talking about values as generic terms is not going to get us from me to we, and it really has to be. We have to be more disciplined about that.
Ashraf, do you want to jump in? I see your hand up.
Yeah, I'll just take a minute. So just in case, Joni, in case you were referring to the list that I was talking about, those 5 words that I mentioned are not values actually, in case you're referring, but just to reframe, just shares in case there's a miscommunication. Those 5 feelings, those are feelings. In fact, we also had this discussion in our collective, in the youth collective, where we said we can talk about the values, but at the end of the day, how do they translate into what I'm feeling? And for young people, this was drawn from a young people's engagement. And they said, finally, it's the space and what it makes you feel. And then that's a subjective thing. But if I'm feeling love, then that's enough for me. And that may be different. But so I just want to clarify. I did those lists.
Well, and I think, I think one of the things that is interesting for us to think about, right, to both your points, is that even if we have these conversations in which we are more explicit and clarify, even the assumption that we're all going to come to a shared definition is challenging, right? Because, if I talk about love and then Drew talks about love and then Dio talks about love, like we could be all over the map on what love is. And I know for Chris and GHR, part of this conversation was also about, okay, if we can talk about these things and normalize the discussion and interrogation of them, does that give us an opportunity to mobilize together differently than we are now in a way that acknowledges those things? And I'm curious if that resonates for folks in terms of being able to take this kind of conversation and feed it into then how we act collectively, or if folks feel like, I don't know, maybe not. I don't know. I'm curious if others have thoughts about that. As I'm listening, I'm sharing what I'm hearing back to the room. Anybody want to jump in on that? We've got a bunch of folks joining us now. If you're just coming in, thank you for joining. We are deep in a conversation about defining values, about love and humanity, about how we collectively act on our values. And we're just having a conversation and trying to figure out where it might take us. Dio, it looks like you're ready to jump back in.
No, I just want to say something. And the first point really for me is that foundations and organizations are rooted in their ways. they've been around for decades, and this is how we do things. You'll find this everywhere. But for all of us here, I think we can all agree that the pandemic, and of course a number of events around it, that's sort of became a major catalyst to then give people a rude awakening. Chris mentioned the killing of George Floyd and several other global events and US-based events. And so there seems to be, a gradual move towards some of the issues or values that have actually been on the table, but have just never been visited. So my own call for caution here will be, I think it is a good opportunity, a good time to actually push as far as we can, but we also need to be aware of the fact that several foundations are doing so many things, and many of us will still have to go back to the leadership and try to get buy-in, and build connection between what they're trying to do and what we are discussing here. So my preference will be that how much exploration and interrogation do we need to keep having around some of these issues that then gets us to a point where we can see the intersectionality, and the coordination that then can happen towards mobilization around some set of goals and values that I think are likely to emerge from this conversation. But I do see this as something, as a conversation that I think is timely and something that can potentially be a game changer. Well, maybe not game changer is the right word, but at least, add to some of the good work that we are beginning to see across foundations. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. I want to just see if there's anyone else who we haven't heard from who'd like to jump in. I see Jeru's hand, but I also know we've got a bunch of folks that have hopped on. And we started this conversation by just sharing why we're here. So you don't have to have anything super wise or prophetic to say. You can just say why you're here, and that would be okay too. Would anybody like to jump in? I just want to make sure folks have a chance to enter. All right, Jeru, I'm going to turn it to you and give people a chance to think about what they might want to contribute.
There are some silent members.
We're going to work on that. I might have to start calling names.
Yeah. Daisy's no. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think if you call names, maybe people are shy. Sunish. Yeah. I know all these people who would probably have a lot to say on this, but are probably shy. I don't know why. No, I have to say, seeing the Catalyst background on so many screens has given me an idea, Chris, in this session, because not everyone's a Catalyst team member, is I'm going to try to have our closing session with asking everyone to put the background, thanks to Lina's initiative. So I think that's going to be a new idea. It's also sharing part of that feeling. But anyway, I think Lina put it in the chat, so people also started using it. But anyway, I think the important thing what I'm hearing from Dio, from you, from Ashraf, earlier from Chris when we had talked also, is that the time is right to do something around the whole narrative being shifted away, even in foundations and everywhere, about achieve, so to speak, to what you started with, Chris, which is how can we build it more around values? How can we build it around the we? How can we build it about beyond self? I don't know what to call it. I'm not the English major, so all words will not be. But, I think there is something over here which I'm hearing people saying, and I understand, Dio, you saying you have to go back to the foundation board or whatever, and Chris, I remember when we spoke. So I think there is something over here which is coming. And if there is, we should probably write that and see how we are able to build it more structurally. And I see Joni posting away that the UN will probably add to it, but let's build this from the sector and then involve the UN and amplify. That's all. I just find it quite interesting that there is this voice echoing over here,
I see Daisy. I'm gonna pull Daisy in because she took off her mic. Nice to meet you, Daisy.
Nice to meet you. Sorry, I have the flu, which I usually
Oh,
topple
no.
up. I would today. No, I joined. It was one of those flashes where I was in a session, a catalyzing change week session that was talking about going for the ego as usual, and going from the ego to the we go, and then popped up the reminder of this session about the collective we. And I think I completely agree on having the values. I think you can never get the language right for everybody, and anything you say will always resonate slightly different with anybody. And I think keeping it as simple as the we, even though, as you said, you didn't hear it, you needed to be understood, explained. I think keeping it that simple and then just going with the core of what the we's about without trying to make it too vast, and just the fun, as long as the fundamental. I think that's the thing with Catalyst, is every session you'll go to and you'll meet, a lot of us are here because we believe that there's something more important than ourselves. And it might not be the community, it might be the planet. For some people, it might be education for others, but it's believing that there is a greater good. And I think as long as we keep that general we as the center, then surely you can't go wrong with that, can you?
I love that. Thank you. Chris, go ahead, jump in.
Well, I'm curious, Lisa, if there are anyone in the room that has seen examples of successful we building. I don't know if that's an actual phrase, but you guys have inspired me. Is there, Catalyst could be one example. Are there others in this group that have seen good examples that we might pull some wisdom from?
Unity.Earth. Unity.Earth.
Unity.Earth. Excellent.
And I have a sense that, Chris, given what Daisy just shared, it's also making me appreciate that we are probably in a lot of we conversations that we're not actually thinking about in this way, because to what Daisy said about the simplicity of this being about we, right? The question is sort of, where are you in a group of people who are committed to collective movement, collective action, whatever that looks like, and for whatever reason, right? Whatever the motivation is, and some shared sense, as Daisy said, of the greater good. And my guess is we might be able to identify a lot of those spaces we're in. And then the question is, how do we leverage those more to have these kinds of conversations, to really push ourselves to not just stay at the, isn't it great we're all together, right? But more to the, okay, so where should we be going and why, and how are we going to get there? Part of the conversation, which is, I think, Chris, is part of the mobilization desire, right? Is how we move from that shared we to then the shared what. So
I think that's right. And with only looks like about 10 minutes left, maybe we start to hear what people want in a coming conversation. I see Artie has.
Yeah, Artie, love to hear from you. Artie, you're breaking up a little bit. Sorry, we can't quite hear you.
Artie, I'm sorry, we're unable to hear you because you're breaking up. Perhaps you can put it into the chat for us. Sorry to ask that.
Sunish, do you want to jump in?
Sure. Hi, sorry, I'm at the airport, so some noise in the background.
That's okay.
But yeah, I just, in our experience, I think, and someone asked good examples, and I think COVID was a great turnout, coming together of people, but it was collective fear that brought two people together than collective opportunity. I think we've not done a good job of showing collective opportunity for people to come together. So something to learn from COVID, but one would wish that another COVID happens. The other, I think, in our little experience back at Ashoka, in my Ashoka times, I think we have spoken a lot about letting go of identities. One could say egos, but also, identities come in the way of collaboration. So when we say we have to let go of our identities, names, terms that we use, etc., and think more about, in principle, what is the goal and what is the work. So that has helped us in small little collectives that we have worked in. Vartalip is a great example. Ashraf, I'm sure must have spoken about it. I joined a little later. Yeah, that's what comes to my mind.
Thank you so much. I wrote in the chat this piece about identities coming to play in the collaborative. I think that's a really important point, and I think it goes a little bit to what Dio said earlier about the interrogation, right, of things, and sort of acknowledging that everybody is not necessarily coming at it from the same place. Ashraf, your hand's up now that you're out of the car. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Okay. I know time is running short. I think thanks, Sunish, for mentioning the Vartalip Coalition. No, I have not mentioned it as yet, but it's something I think what I would suggest of this group, if you all, Lisa and Chris and Matt and everybody, if you all can host this again, let's keep this conversation running, because to me, this is the most important conversation that needs to be had across collectives, across issues, across education. So I would love to be part of that. And I just want to share, because it was mentioned from me to be it is all romantic, nostalgic stuff, but 1993, our first youth program, which started conflict,
Oh dear. I think she just got cut off. She was just about to give a great example. Okay, well, we'll find her and get it later. I do want to acknowledge we're at about 3 minutes till time. One of the things that I am hearing, and I'm just curious what others are taking away, is the desire to have this kind of conversation be the conversation, right? Like, where are we having this on a regular basis, and everything we're talking about? How does this become a part of that? And I know Catalyst 2030 can find a way to help infuse this everywhere, but it sounds like one of the things folks are asking for, Chris, is a way to keep this conversation going, right? It's sort of like if it's in the water, you can't miss it. You have to talk about it. So how do we put it in the water, right? And to Joni's references to places where that's happening, or the Unity cluster, like, how do we build this into the work? And how do we just show up to continue to have the conversation? Do others have suggestions about ways to keep the conversation going? We now have all this chat information. We have the recording from this session, and we can find you and keep engaging you. But are there other ways or places that you think we should make sure this conversation is happening in either in the context of Catalyst 2030 or some other context? I just saw something in chat from Matt. Thank you so much. I appreciate this. Matt just shared a practical way to shift the conversation around an open letter to shifting the funding paradigm. Excellent. Chris, do you want to close us out?
And Lisa, sorry, maybe just before we close out, I just wanted to say as well on that, a huge thank you to GHR for already embodying some of those huge shifts in practice and thought and mentality and leadership in shifting that funding paradigm. As you know, we've been a partner of JHR, and we've seen an enormous shift in the needle in our relationship. So huge thank you for everything you do.
Well, thank you, Matt. We have a lot more learning to do, a lot more work to do internally. Appreciate that you're seeing a glimpse of what is possible. Deo's comment around interrogating just. We are interrogating love, and we need to do more of it, and we want to continue this conversation around love, humanity, values. So I'm so grateful for Catalyst in hosting this conversation, for Lisa, our friend, for leading this discussion, and for all of you for bringing your thoughts, your feelings. I love lifting up feelings in this conversation. And it sounds as though this will be the first of several, and hopefully we can get this mobilization moving. So thank you all. Jeru, do you have any last words you want to share?
Thank you,
Just
everybody,
want to
for
thank
coming.
Lisa and Chris. You all were fantastic. And I'm so happy that we'll be moving on to doing something. I love a session when there's a concrete action. And here there's a clear concrete action that we are going to continue the dialogue on making sure we have a global week, whatever that shape or form.
Whatever that is.
Or
Awesome.
a new name, God alone knows, but yeah.
We'll come up with something.
Yeah. Super.
Thank you, everybody, so much for
Thank you,
joining.
Chris.
Have a
Thanks,
great
Lisa.
day wherever
Thank
you are.
Lisa.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.